Hey, Joey, man, thank you for spending a little time with us. Why don't you just kind of introduce yourself and a little bit about your military background and who you are?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. Well, my name is Joey Jones. I grew up in Dalton, Georgia, and just a few years ago moved back to the Calhoun area. In that time in between, which was about 15 years, I guess now, or actually, no, 25 years, Lord help. I joined the Marine Corps 2005. Thought I was going to go to Florida to school and North Carolina to be stationed, and I got sent to California for school in Hawaii. So real far away from home. And that career took me to California multiple times, Japan, Hawaii as duty stations, but then Iraq and Afghanistan for war. Eventually, I was injured in Afghanistan in 2010 and stayed in D.C. for 4 years, a few years after my recovery. Moved over to Texas after I retired and then finally made it back to Georgia a few years ago. But as far as my service goes in the Marine Corps, a few years into it, I learned about something called EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. And for the best explanation, they're like the bomb techs of the military. So I did that for the last few years, and that's how I got hurt in Afghanistan, taking bombs apart.
Okay. Yes, you've had a pretty interesting track record in the military.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't that good at it.
What we're doing is we're kind of just breaking down metaphors in the Bible that Paul uses to describe, the weapons and the armor and the kit of for him, the modern day soldier. So Paul talks a little bit about having your feet sandaled with the readiness of the gospel. What does readiness or a battle sense, how is that important to a soldier in a conflict area?
Readiness as a word or a concept is really important, and it's very specific in the military. So we use this term combat readiness. And what's interesting about it is you're talking about the armor of God as dictated in these analogies. And you really have two sets of tools when you go into battle. You have armor and weapons. And I think there's something intentional about calling it armor rather than weapons. Armor is defending yourself and preparing yourself. Readiness happens before that. Readiness is everything from, do you have a sickness that will stop you from deploying? Do you have a physical injury that you need to heal before you can deploy? And then it goes into, do you have those basic, fundamental, foundational training to go be effective in combat? So when we talk about combat readiness, it's a survey of every individual in a unit that's about to deploy, as well as that unit's capability. Have they met all the metrics and done all the things that are foundational, basic, and necessary to be deployable to combat or to go out and accomplish the mission? So I love the term readiness when it talks about sandals, because it's physically down at the bottom. It is a foundation, but it's also, you can't do anything if you can't move. And the analogy I'll give is when I was in boot camp, we did a long march, not to get too technical, but when I got done, I took my socks off and the bottom of my foot peeled off with them. My feet were no good, which meant I was no good. So I had to be out of training for several days, and I felt worthless and useless. And then this analogy of readiness and the sandals coming together, it's the same thing. If you don't have those fundamentals and basics down, if you don't understand how to move with others, and if you're not physically fit and are healthy, then you're not ready and you're useless.
It's interesting because you said that, and it actually spurred in my mind, what level of training do we need in the gospel? Because, later Peter would say, be prepared to give an answer to anyone that sees how you're different because of the gospel. And so I even wondered, did Paul have in mind in that moment, like, okay, in the sense of being trained in the gospel, like, be prepared to not only just act differently, but to know, the story, to know the process by which someone steps from, spiritual death to spiritual life in Jesus and experience the gospel.
I don't know. I found it to be very thought-provoking and poetic. I enjoyed the fact that readiness started at the bottom, but also in the most simple terms. In other words, know your mission and know why you're trying to accomplish it.
So what does that even have to do with positioning, right? Because obviously for a first century soldier, the process of positioning really involved the feet. Because, you weren't going to get dropped anywhere. You weren't going to be taken anywhere. You had to many times walk where you were going to attack the enemy from. So what does terrain or positioning have to do with being ready in a combat situation?
Positioning in general, like where troops are on the battlefield, that is the entirety of military strategy, and it's why militaries win or lose. You can study anything from Sun Tzu to World War II to Iraq and Afghanistan, and a simple mistake of not understanding where the high ground is or where the vulnerable choke points are and putting the right assets in the right position means the difference between winning and losing. The reason why we have these stories where hundreds of soldiers defeated thousands is because it's not just a war of attrition, it's what's your strategic advantage. And that generally comes from your terrain and your positioning. So, for example, the Battle of Gettysburg, I believe it's, I can't remember if it's Cemetery or Missionary Ridge, the Jeff Daniels character from the movie, that was all about having the high ground and holding it. If you have some sort of defense or advantage inherent to your position, then wave and wave can come, you're going to defend it. A better example people probably know better would be when the Marines landed on the Pacific Islands in World War II. If you've ever seen the Pacific, thousands and thousands of U.S. troops landing in waves, even at Normandy. But the defensive positions of the Germans or the Japanese allowed them to defend those places and take us out at higher numbers, because where you decide to put your assets or your troops, where they're positioned in relation to one another and in relation to the enemy, is your entire battle plan.